Welcome to NapChat, our regular National Advisory Panel podcast where we chat about homelessness and multiple disadvantage, including trauma, mental illness, domestic abuse and addiction. We recognise that we've all been on our own unique journeys and none of us have a monopoly on the truth, just our own. This podcast carries a warning. We may discuss things that are distressful or triggering and you should listen to it at your own discretion.
Okay, so welcome everybody to the latest NapChat. We will be talking about the way that people experiencing homelessness are portrayed in adverts and campaigns and posters and the like, and how this may be different to the reality of people's actual experiences. So as ever, we're a group of people with a wide range of opinions and views and lived experiences relating to homelessness, but all of us hope to share some wisdom that can lead to people being empowered to meet their aspirations. So at the moment, we're coming up to Christmas, where there's lots of campaigns and posters around homelessness and trying to raise funds for charities. How are people who are experiencing homelessness generally portrayed in these things? What are the sort of things that people have seen this year?
I've actually noticed there's been like a bit of a movement away from the traditional like hairy bloke on a bench looking like really dishevelled and stuff, and I've just kind of checked out the kind of main charities, and there's less focus on that. So it's kind of more, I don't know, man. I think they kind of got their head. Yeah, charities have realised they can't just keep portraying the people they're helping as like being so useless. That's kind of been the thing. There's no kind of yeah, I don't know what you call it, like a phenomenon, like where so police forces, for example, they've got to simultaneously say that crime is worse than ever, but at the same time say they're doing a great job solving it in order to keep their funding going. And so charities have got a very similar thing where they've got to simultaneously say this thing is worse than ever. So at the moment it's the cost of living crisis, it's worse than ever, and this is how it's affecting people, and they need us. You know, that's the kind of, in order to get money, that the charities have to major on how these people need the charities to be able to survive and kind of tie the shoelaces and all that. And actually, you know, the reality is that most of the clients I've worked with probably know a lot more about the system than the workers actually helping them out. And so they'll often, be more knowledgeable, have more expertise in dealing with stuff. And yet it's kind of the support workers who get the credit for a lot of stuff that people are actually doing off their own backs without any help at all. So it's kind of, that's I think that's part of the reason why it's so prevalent, is, you know, essentially the message from charities has to be, you know, without us these people would be done for, and that's kind of I think the reason why you kind of have these very negative kind of messages coming out, particularly around Christmas.
I think for me, I've seen quite a lot of adverts and campaigns around, you know, it's £35 per person and you can give them a room and a hot meal for Christmas Day. And that's, you know, that's grand if that's what it costs. That's another conversation. But what about after Christmas? Why do only people care about housing someone for one night? And it's not a promise of £35 and, you know, you can get this person housed full stop. It's that one night, it's that one meal. And I've had it even when I've been housed and lonely and living by myself, you know, people suddenly care around Christmas. They don't care the rest of the days of the year. I think that's a really tough acknowledgement to come to, that, you know, we all want to volunteer on Christmas Day. We all want to do things on Christmas Day where, you know, that Christmas magic and that Christmas solidarity, that doesn't have to be limited. It's unlimited. You can do that any time of the year. You can, you know, there are ways to house people that don't require it being the 25th of December.
Yeah, totally agree. It's, you do get a little bit skeptical, don't you, when you see all of the big charities who can afford to advertise on TV as well, because the adverts must cost a fortune, you know, and, you know, they will make a lot of money out of this time of year by pulling at the heartstrings of people who do, you know, only think about it at Christmas and things. And you know, there should be more of an effort to look at homelessness, you know, across the whole year, and, you know, say this is what we can do, you know, this is how we can make differences to people's lives. But it isn't, it's about that meal, you know, like that one Christmas meal, and then what happens to people after that, you know. So yeah, totally agree.
I've seen various housing projects as well put out like Amazon wish lists for their service users, their clients, whatever we're calling them, And part of me like, that's banging. And I go on looking at the Amazon wish list. I'm like, what does person in room 14 want? Like, I want to get that for them because I love giving presents, just as a weird thing. But anyway, and then you go on there and it's hand warmers. And I'm like, do your clients actually want hand warmers for Christmas? Are you actually wrapping this up and giving this as a present? And then I've talked to the people, because I'm friends with these people that live in these accommodation programs. And I go, what say did you have in the Amazon wish list? Didn't even know it was happening. They don't want long johns. What a boring gift. They're like, actually, we want Rizzlers and filters. Or do you know what I really want? I want some fizzy pop instead of the cheap squash. Do you know, those little things? But it blows my mind that you're advertising these Christmas campaigns, and especially when they're presents for people, and they've not used co-production. They've not actually just asked people. And I guarantee if you ask them, they're not going to come out and be like, oh, well, I want a Porsche, you know, because we've programmed people to think that they don't deserve anything nice. They'll probably say, I want a box of chocolates, because that's all they think they're worth, which obviously isn't true as well. But yeah, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, that's a massive missed opportunity, isn't it, as well, you know, for people to be able to get something like different, you know. But yeah, God.
The focus on Christmas, and a lot of people will need a hot meal and they will need the other things we talked about, but it's not understanding the whole person and not understanding the support they need. So if you've got people, just one example, who have issues over reading, writing, because they've never had the support they needed, and that's going to make a difference to their lives. It's going to make them more independent and more able to go out and do things, rather than hope that nobody spots that they're not quite sure what the packaging says, but they're hoping that they get the right thing. And yes, it's not a direct present, but what it is enabling a charity to pay for somebody's time to help and train these people to buy the books and other things that are needed to help with reading, writing, the ability to just do simple arithmetic, you know. And that's just one tiny example, and I'm sure between us we can come up with so many areas that people are needing support. So yeah, it's a bigger picture, and somehow we've got to get that across. I'm not, in a sense, criticizing any of the charities, big or small, because if they had me sitting at the table saying, okay, you've come up with this, what are we going to do? We've got a 30-second ad, or we've got something in the local magazine. I can't say I would know how to portray some of these things, but that's the advantage, I think, with putting out videos, which you get people talking and saying, what are the issues? What difference would it make if we could help you, sticking to the same theme, read and write, and actually talk to people, hear what a life's been like without those abilities, and gradually get some of those messages across. And then somebody else will say, well, hang on, I've got another idea here, because this is what's affecting my friend or affecting me.
Yes, well, I've noticed a few, because I had a look around some of the kind of charities and like news items and that, and I agree with what's been said, that there's quite a lot of imagery, I think, around somebody enjoying the support they're getting at that time, like they're having a nice chat with a key worker and laughing, or that kind of imagery. And there was in a local paper I saw, there was some stuff around, this is kind of all the stuff that we've done with the money that you're saying, like, you know, and it's showing people working really hard to set up tables of food and that kind of thing, and lots of stuff around that. But there were still, I must say, a few of the kind of older man on a bench, maybe facing the other way, which is a bit of an improvement. You can't see their face, but that kind of imagery was still around quite a bit, and quite a narrow, I guess, view of things. I don't know if anyone else had any thoughts around the sort of the breadth of the way that people are described, or whether it is quite kind of a stereotypical kind of older man on a park bench or younger person kind of running away type imagery, or has it moved away from that at the moment, or?
So I think there's been a bit of a move. I think there has been a bit of pushback along these lines. I think certainly some charities seem to be kind of hearing that the kind of criticism of that type of stuff. Like, kind of, I guess there's that criticism against like in the 80s kind of aid in Africa and stuff like that. The same kind of mentality that kind of underpinned it. So I think they're kind of charities, whether it's kind of the best of intentions or just because it's going to make more money if they change their tax a little bit. I think it's something I've seen, but again, they've kind of, I don't know, there's like a little bit of move towards like the whole effective altruism type idea where you kind of demonstrate that you actually this is what your money goes to. So for like 29 pounds, I think it was like I saw an advert like 29 pounds gets a Christmas meal, and I'm like, how does a Christmas meal cost 29 pounds? But anyway,
I think I've predominantly seen the old bearded man sort of rough sleeping. But if I haven't seen that, I have seen an increase in, female representation, which arguably is a great thing, but it's always linked with domestic abuse, which kind of implies that you can only be homeless as a female if you're being domestically abused, and that causes issues amongst itself as well. And I just think, all right, you're not gonna get a picture of everyone and what they've gone through and how they've become homeless and their story in one advert. And I get that that's a real issue, and how is it best to get those donations and whatnot, but there is a better way than just sort of representing the stereotypical bearded man. And I think charities are scared to perhaps say the genuine good things they're doing as well. So I know, supported accommodations, that they're paying for people to have, the double taxis on Christmas Day so they can go have the Christmas Day that they want. Now, they're not sharing that, because if they shared that, their funders would say, hold up, you're paying 60 quid for a taxi to travel 40 minutes down the road for one person on Christmas Day. Now, to the charity, they can see that that's going to benefit that person's mental health. They're going to have a great Christmas. They're going to be with their family or their friends, but they can't publicise that in case their funding gets pulled. They have to go down that route. And I think that's where it becomes like a wider sector issue, where even the good things that the charities are doing, the fact that they might have, for that one resident, they might have bought them, I don't know, a season ticket to the local football ground for their Christmas present because that's what they're really into, or whatever it is. They can't shout about that from the rooftops because of fear of funding. And I think that's a really difficult conversation that I guess needs to happen between them and commissioners and whatnot.
And in one sense, they're kind of pandering to what the public want, I guess, to some level, because if they started talking about the complexities of homelessness, they're probably going to lose. They're not going to be as effective campaigns. But I would say that it's, particularly the big national charities, it's on them to be informing the public what homelessness is like. So for many years, like the focus has always been about rough sleeping. So the public equate rough sleeping to homelessness. And obviously it's much wider than that. And now that, many areas rough sleeping is, has fallen dramatically following the everyone in thing, they're now having to kind of come up with the next, okay, what's the next thing we're going to go with? So I have seen some more stuff around rough sleeping again, but it seems to be less kind of focus on that. And as I say, ones I've seen is more about cost of living. It's had to change the goalposts a little bit just to kind of keep up with the public. But I think, the shelters and the crisis of the world have the ability to actually use these advert campaigns to inform the public more than just make money off them. That might be desperately unfair, but I think that they can do it, because otherwise, they made a rod to their own back by focusing on rough sleeping as the only issue, because now it's significantly down in a lot of areas. Then they're kind of working out what they need to go with next, and they're having to compete now against food banks and all this kind of other stuff, which is in the public's mind as well.
I saw there was a report out this year about public opinions, and it does feel a little bit like the public are ahead of what people give them credit for. Can give us credit for, you know, in a way that kind of, it was definitely in the majority that people, the public, said that the causes of homelessness were not kind of individual failings. It was more of a societal kind of context, and that was the majority view, not as previous, and it's kind of flipping that way a bit more recently. Though there was some findings that people did generally think kind of the main cause was related to substance misuse. But if you looked at everything in the round, it was more the contextual rather than the individual. And I wonder whether there's something difficult about what's the message if it's the context, kind of, because you're going to have to talk about the funding of parts of society and poverty and things like that, which is a difficult advert, maybe, I don't know.
It's a difficult line they've got to tread, because I think they realise that, you know, they can't, you know, they kind of have to find something that, and this, I think it's a genuine difficulty, and I don't blame them for it. They have to find something which is palatable for the public. So if they just, you know, if they could end up making things worse themselves by only focusing on substance use, for example. And my opinion would be is that people seem to associate substance use much more, like, you know, much more strongly than it actually is with homelessness in general. Like, you know, I say mental health issues are kind of more related, because obviously homelessness causes a lot of mental health issues, you know, directly. I think that, yeah, it's just there's also interesting kind of dynamics with the population. So some organisations will explicitly be raising money for people with offending histories, and you think that actually that's a surprising one for people to have sympathy with. But there's some, you know, many people who really do. So it's kind of, I guess there's a real complexity to the way the public is kind of understands issues, and you kind of have less. You can have ones which are actually more important issues or affect a wider number of people. So say, for example, temporary accommodation standards is one example, because there's hundreds of thousands of people in TA. But that kind of doesn't resonate at a particular time, whereas as opposed to another issue which might be seen as more of a live issue. But, you know, one sense, going back to that effective altruism thing, again, I say the big charities are the only ones in a position to really be identifying what makes a difference. And it might be, and I don't know if it is or not, but it might be that actually focusing on temporary accommodation standards or whatever might actually be the best way to, you know, improve the lives of the most number of people. I don't know, but rather than kind of focusing on a relatively small number of people rough sleeping. That's controversial, I know, but I think there's that kind of, I don't know that conversation's been had, as far as I know, but I think it would be good to have it. But the kind of, as I say, the fact that charities are kind of, they're putting these appeals out primarily to get money at Christmas, kind of, it narrows their ability to actually have an intelligent conversation.
So we've talked a bit about kind of maybe why this happens, you know, why things are portrayed in particular ways. It'd be helpful, I think, just to chat maybe about the impact that can have on either on individuals or on kind of general public sentiment for the rest of the year, as it were.
I think it ends up shaping the staff that come into the sector. So certainly when I came into the homelessness sector, like, my attitudes were very much like, you know, oh, this is all related to drug and alcohol use and the mental health issues, and, you know, and we can solve them, and, you know, we've got them. If we do things in a particular way, we can solve these problems for these people, and that's the kind of way that's where my starting point was really. So I think there's that. It has the effect of it kind of affects the starting point that people come from, and then, you know, I guess most staff will their kind of viewpoint will quite quickly change, but that's kind of, that can, and also, like, you kind of have like the soup kitchen and soup run mentality as well, kind of, which often is kind of coming from that sort of response to homelessness. And actually, when you do it for any length of time, you realize actually there's a whole load more stuff to this. But I think that kind of those prejudices or that kind of, like, those assumptions that are perpetuated by the way charities kind of message about stuff, it does then have an impact on the outlook and the kind of the expertise of the people coming into the sector. So, you know, I think if people are coming into the sector, like, probably from a more sort of nuanced position of understanding it all, then you might get you know, it wouldn't take so long to kind of get good workers, basically. You know, you don't spend the first however many years getting it wrong, and probably, you know, in my case, doing a lot more harm than good, probably. So I think that's probably one of the effects it has, you know, for the rest of the year, when you kind of have these messages very strong at Christmas.
I think as a client, it can have a bit of an effect on your self-worth and sort of where you see yourself in like the hierarchy of others, which, you know, shouldn't matter too much, I guess, but it does matter. And it also makes asking for help, say in January, very difficult, because you've been told, you know, for the whole week of Christmas week and whatever, that you've received extra help. You've got these box of chocolates, you've got this crate of food, you've received all of this extra help. And then January, which is a longer month, everyone's struggling, and, you know, you're coming down from the Christmas highs and that festive period, and then you drop and there's nothing. And, you know, there's no support, and it's a bit of a intense roller coaster where, you know, living in a service, you're told that, you know, you guys are extra important at Christmas, and you're not obviously outright told that but by having the campaigns about homelessness, you do feel like, oh, people are caring, people are on my side, people are wanting to help, people are wanting to volunteer, people are interested in homelessness, they are donating more, this is positive. And then January happens and you sort of sit in your cold room and you go, all right, people don't actually care. And then you get on with the rest of the year. And it does sort of have a weird impact, I think, when you're in that service and you go from getting presents or getting, you know, extra food or whatever it is, to then not again, well, you think, well, what is the difference? And I think that's probably quite a damaging effect that the focus around Christmas has on like being an actual client, I guess, because it hinders your ability to ask for help, and it spots like that pressure that's already on Christmas. It's already on to have, you know, that magical social media under the tree pressure. Yeah, does that make any sense?
I think it makes a huge amount of sense, because, I mean, just think of this last month. It's been abnormally cold. Now, getting food at Christmas is obviously welcome, but having what it needs to get through the cold. I mean, obviously we've got the SWEP, the severe weather emergency protocol in action, I would imagine, across the country. But anybody out in this, or even slightly warmer temperatures, it may look a lot to a government person picking at what temperature people need help. But I can tell you, if you're out and you're cold, and especially when you get wet, life is pretty miserable, and life is literally, for some, right on the edge. And that's going to apply right the way through in the spring, because we don't quite know what the weather's going to be. It's going to vary around the country. And in a way, cold is the least worry, because you hopefully can wrap up enough and keep mobile enough. But wet weather, which we will probably get a lot of, certainly some areas, right the way through the spring, that is really critical. And it's also miserable. You know, at least if you're chatting to people and it's a bright, frosty day, it feels a bit better in your heart, as it were, than grey, miserable, and only I could get the shelter I need, and not being stuck out and ignored. So I think we need to find a way of expanding that, to not only talk about the journey that we've hinted at in the, we've got somebody off the street, but they also need a lot more to get them through so they're self-dependent, but also through those long, often very dismal and hungry days of the late autumn right the way through to the early spring. So
ignoring, say, the big charities that I'm assuming have extra money and probably employ a Christmas advertising role, all of the smaller charities that are already, you know, struggling, they're at capacity, they're stretched beyond their measure, if they're putting all of their energy and efforts into Amazon wish lists or social media marketing and what pictures to put up for the Christmas campaigns, and which does take time and effort. That's surely taking away from the work they're supposed to be doing to support their clients, to do the outreach, to do all their normal jobs, because I'm assuming they don't have the funding to employ someone to do that specifically. So it's a weird one where they're almost stretching themselves more, again, at the disservice of the clients.
So I think there's two things going on. There's kind of, people will give money to something where they feel like, you know, they can help out, and there's sympathy, and they feel moved by it. But also there's this other area where people need to have a kind of a connection. So at winter, when it's cold, everybody can get a glimpse of like being cold, and me to sort of have a kind of connection, and that helps people think, all right, actually, God, at least I've got a bit of shelter though, even, and I'm cold and I don't like it, and this, so I can kind of get that connection. And so all the charities, and you lose that the rest of the year, so then charities are going to have to kind of hone in on, this is the month where we're going to get people, and maybe we'll get people that will volunteer. And yeah, maybe they just volunteer now, but we can keep some of those volunteers. They'll volunteer. Some of them will stay for the rest of the year. Some of them will end up working, if not all. So there's this huge amount of resource and pressure at this time. But then on the other side, it is leading to some of the negative consequences that we've talked about earlier. So we've said a few things about kind of some of the ways that people are portrayed, and perhaps the reasons why that kind of imagery is used, and sort of the negative effects that might have, but with maybe kind of some details about perhaps why that does happen. Just for the last kind of part of the podcast, it might be helpful to think, well, what do we think should be different? Kind of, what sort of imagery, perhaps, what kind of, if any at all, is there other ways of doing things that work? What do people feel?
I think my first response to that is the message. Certainly, I think that the right message is that, you know, there's a group of people who, you know, the system doesn't work for, and it's the system's fault. It's, you know, it's lack of house building. It's a lack of fair kind of, you know, use of welfare provision and that sort of stuff. And it's not the individual failure. You know, in one sense, it's not that people can't maintain their home. That's not what drives the majority of homelessness. I appreciate there are going to be one or two cases where, you know, they, you know, really are at that point of not being able to maintain anything. But the vast majority of people who are homeless because they didn't have fair access to housing in the first place. They didn't have fair access to suitable housing in the first place. And I think the kind of the onus, you know, the message needs to be it's not about this individual's inability to do stuff. It's that the system is just broken. You know, in one sense, you're having people having to upload their documents 4 or 5 times before the council actually processes their application. That's nothing to do with their competency. That's not the individual's competency. That's the system not working. You have all this kind of, like, you know, ridiculous, like, you know, the benefit cap and all this kind of stuff, which is kind of, you know, like a Kafka novel. Just, that's how bad it is. And I think that's what I think the message needs to be. It needs to be about the system. The system is broken. It's not that this group of people are incapable of doing this stuff. It's that the system is so ridiculous that if you actually kind of looked at it, you just wouldn't believe it. You know, you wouldn't believe how ridiculous some of the things are that happen, that, you know, from different organisations, particularly like councils and stuff. And I say that, you know, the fault needs to be taken off the individual, and homelessness needs to stop being an individual responsibility, you know, all kind of, you know, the fault of the individual. It needs to be the fault of the system itself. I think, you know, the message is about, you know, organisations need to stop making out like they're the only thing that's making this person housed and keeping a house. Actually, it's 99% the individual, and the professional can probably do some good stuff around the edges, but it's mostly that individual taking initiative and taking responsibility and being competent in doing that stuff, rather than the current position, which is, you know, look at this poor person, let's have mercy on him, which is not helpful, I don't think.
I think for me, a campaign this time of year, if I was to give my money to it, it would look like, it would be honest. it would have lived experience involved in it somehow. And it might even be like looking forward. Like, I'm more likely to give my money to an advert I see in December that's talking about what they're doing in the summer than I am about what Christmas meal they're going to have. Like, if they're sat there in December saying, right, this summer, this is how many clients we're going to get. This is what we need your money for. And vice versa. If I saw an advert in the summer that was like, right, this winter, you know, we're prepping for it in the summer, because for me, I'm then thinking, right, A, this is a charity that cares, or a business or whatever that cares all year round. B, they're being honest about it. And if there was the element of co-production in there, take my money. Like, if they've got clients saying, actually, we hate the fact that we only have one support work session a week and we want 2, and a staff member is going to cost 30 grand a year, you know, a qualified staff member is going to cost 30 grand a year, so please give us this. Take my money. Like, if there was that honesty, that transparency, and that involvement with people who have been through the system and is given honest feedback, and that charity is championing that, then that's what I'd like to see, personally.
I love that idea about the campaign being driven by the clients who use the service. Like, this is what this service needs to get money for. This is what we need. And this is why we need you to donate your money. Like, that's amazing.
I mean, I do get frustrated just when I see those adverts on TV, because, like, how many years have they been going for, and nothing's changed. You know, if anything, things are a lot worse, you know. So it's and I think for the public, they must get a little bit frustrated, you know, just themselves, thinking, well, nothing, you know, they can see there's more people on the streets, you know. It's but yeah, I definitely think it would be really refreshing, wouldn't it, to see a charity or an organisation talking about honestly about the issues around homelessness, and, you know, how they can be addressed, you know, how we can solve it. But yeah.
It raises a question of, why do we have to have a big advertising campaign at one point of the year? Because no matter how much money you got to throw at it, short of actually doing a film, you can't get a lot across in a half-minute or a minute slot. But if you do 2 or 3 minutes video once a month, you can talk about different things in the lives of some of the people that you're working with. That brings those people alive in you know, for people. They're sharing their life over a year, and it gives you the opportunity to talk about the different issues that people have, and also the charity has, in the way it's going to help support people. So I think, yeah, maybe little and often is a better approach than, unfortunately, seeing the same thing again and again. We know it's well-intentioned, and obviously I certainly would be grateful for it, but a different approach, bringing out the breadth of the realities that people have, rather than just one image rammed out there once a year, would be a real positive move. And you just think of all the things that are going on at the moment, which actually, fortunately, are being brought up on a bigger scale. Things like the damp in housing. That doesn't get mentioned, but if we've got people in temporary accommodation, or people who've been in that accommodation and then been told they've got to go because they asked for a replacement fridge. You know, we've seen some pretty horrific stories out there about people in our country being treated pretty abysmally, and the system letting it carry on. So if we can get some of those messages out a little at a time, including the success stories, you know, people are getting through stuff, they're starting to rebuild, and then they are moving on to, you know, living good lives. So there is a positive outcome as well. I think that is also very useful. It's not all desperate. There's a lot of desperation in there, but there's also achievements and successes. And I think that needs to be shared as well.
Raise a lot of questions for me. I'm thinking about how, like, there's the new ways of kind of campaigning and media use is, like, maybe away from adverts and flyers and things like that at a particular time, and how those can be utilised a bit more, and how perhaps maybe conditions that might be placed on adverts because of their potentially political nature can maybe be circumvented with the use of other kind of platforms and videos and other ways of reaching the public that could be good. But I think it's a topic that we'll definitely come back to, probably in the summer would be a good idea. But with that, we'll finish off for this month's episode, and I look forward to speaking again next month.
We hope you enjoyed this Snapchat. Like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode and keep up to date.